CNN's Jim Acosta joins us now with what his sources are telling him. Jim, what are you learning about all the fallout surrounding the ABC News interview?
Yeah, John, sources telling me and Abby Phillip, my colleague, that essentially people inside the White House and outside the White House, close to the president, feel that Mr. Trump mishandled these questions coming from ABC about whether or not he would accept foreign dirt on a political opponent in the upcoming 2020 campaign. One source told me earlier today that these clips coming from ABC have been, quote, tough to watch. And they essentially feel at this point the president did try to clean this up. But there has been some lasting damage. They're not exactly sure how much damage was done, but there was some lasting damage from what the president said. He clearly invited foreign governments to turn over damaging information on political opponents in that interview. And as you were just playing a few moments ago, he sort of cleared it up, but left a lot of collusion confusion because in the course of that interview on Fox and Friends, he seemed to be saying, well, maybe I would turn it over to the FBI, but I might want to have a look at it first. That's not exactly the same thing as going straight to the FBI.
No, not at all. And I understand, Jim, that some of the president's advisors have taken issue with how Sarah Sanders handled all of this, correct?
That's right. And there was some grumbling going on inside the White House among some of the president's political advisors as to whether or not the outgoing White House press secretary simply granted too much access to the president during the course of this interview and put him in a position where he made these kinds of comments. Now, of course, it was the president's decision to do the interview and also make those remarks, so you can't blame too much of this on Sarah Sanders. But there was some finger pointing going on inside the White House and among the president's political advisors, and it just goes to show you, John, that there was concern as to what the president said. Otherwise, they wouldn't be pointing fingers at one another.
So the people you're talking to, Jim, do they think these comments from the president are going to hurt him with his supporters at all?
You know, what we're hearing at this point, and John, you and I have seen this movie before, when the president makes these sorts of remarks, it is kind of incredible how much Teflon coating he has when it comes to this issue of interference in our elections. The sources that we've been talking to over the last 24 hours have told us essentially they feel, though, that this is just an issue for Democrats and people in the media, not necessarily something that's going to dent his support among his supporters. And I think one true sign of that came earlier today, John, when the Senate Majority Leader was thanked by the president on Twitter for Mitch McConnell's comments to Fox News that essentially the public needs to move on all of this and that Democrats are never going to give this up. It's just one more example when it comes to this issue of foreign interference. It seems that the leadership of the Republican Party has essentially had this president's back no matter what he says.
I will say we've heard from many nonpartisan people in the national security community that they have been concerned about these comments as well. Jim Acosta, thank you very much. Joining us now, someone with a better sense than almost anyone of how the president thinks and what he really believes, CNN political analyst and New York Times White House correspondent Maggie Haberman. Maggie, CNN's reporting that there are people inside the White House looking at what the president said this week, and they're concerned. They think it didn't go well. What are you hearing?
There's a couple of things that have been going on. One is there is certainly concern about the specific remarks about, I'd take it, which was his language about foreign interference. And to be clear, we weren't talking about, which he's describing as opposition research, and we should be very clear that's not what that is. That's not what opposition research is. And I know we've talked about this here before, but it's really worth noting again. And this doesn't have to be Russia. This could be almost any country. They're concerned about the fact that he actually gave a series of interviews in the last 2 weeks. 2 of them were on his foreign trip, his state visit to the UK, and then and to Normandy, and then this interview, very long interview with George Stephanopoulos, where he said all manner of things that a number of his aides thought were regrettable, a number of his advisors thought were regrettable. He talked about the Vietnam War very dismissively as he was getting ready to attend D-Day commemorations. He then gave this interview with George Stephanopoulos. They don't think it will necessarily dent his support, but they also know that his base has to grow, that he can't contract if he's going into 2020. And anything that could shave off even a little bit of support is worrisome.
The part about being concerned with the George Stephanopoulos interview confuses me because it wasn't a trick question. Nope. It's one of the major questions out there. Would you listen to outreach from foreign countries offering dirt on political opponents? Robert Mueller basically presented that question to the world at the end of his one public statement.
That question was also asked of the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, about a meeting that Jared Kushner attended with the president's son and the then campaign chairman Paul Manafort with a Russian Kremlin-linked lawyer during the campaign. Would you do that again? And Jared Kushner's answer was not just no. It was, I don't know, I'm not going to get into a hypothetical. So this is the second time we have seen that, and it does suggest that there has not been a whole lot learned in terms of going forward. I also think that you can't, this is not excuse-making, to be clear, but I think you have to remember that for this president, acknowledging that he wouldn't do it again would be admitting that someone made a mistake last time, which I think he is always loath to do. But in refusing to do so, he's hurting himself.
So why then what some are calling a walk back today, even though he did still say he would listen and then determine whether to hand it over?
Because there's still the reality of the situation, and there are enough people who know that this had to be dealt with.
There is one other political reality he did create, which to give Democrats an opportunity to propose this legislation, which would make it illegal not to tell the FBI if you get this foreign outreach from foreign adversaries offering dirt on political opponents. That is something the Democrats, I imagine, could run with.
Democrats could absolutely run with that in the House, even though they know it's not going to go anywhere in the Senate. But it could certainly at least just lay bare for people what the issue is and what they're talking about and the stakes here. And this is among Democrats, there is some quiet and not so quiet grumbling that there is more they could be doing on the voting front to just try to, highlight areas where they think the president has problems.
All right, I want to ask you something which you've done a lot of work on the last week, which you had a terrific report which said that there were concerns within the Trump campaign that their internal polling had shown the president trailing Joe Biden in key swing states, many of them. The president then denied it, called it fake news, among other things, I'm sure. And then today, ABC News didn't just mash it. They were handed the very polling from the Trump campaign.
I don't know that they were handed it from the Trump campaign. The Trump campaign certainly confirmed that numbers they had were real. But yes, to your point, we reported, and Politico and CNN also reported that the president was behind Biden in a number of states in a 17-state poll. What the campaign then said, I think once approached with these numbers by ABC, was these were just one set of numbers. It was the worst case scenario. But once again, you have the president of the United States saying this is fake news, this is not real, and that term has come to mean stories he doesn't like.
Right. He didn't like your story, and then he lied about it afterwards.
Right. Look, this is always the question is, I don't know how much of the information he knew. I don't know exactly what he was shown, but that's not really the point. That's why he should be more careful with what he says and not just tweet that everything is fake because it strikes a chord.
Right, although some of the reporting that's been out there also included the fact that he wanted justification for the bad polling. He certainly knew the polling was out there because he wanted it spun a different way.
Yes, he wanted his aides to say that the reporting by us, by you guys, by Politico wasn't true, and then he denied that he had wanted them to deny it. The whole thing is chain reaction to himself.
Once again, reporting by Maggie Haberman in the New York Times proves to be correct.
Thanks, John.
Thank you very much for being with us tonight. I appreciate it.